All right, I think we are about ready to begin. I want to say thank you for everybody for attending. Good morning to everyone, and good afternoon to actually everyone on the East Coast. We have another great turnout for our latest webinar in the NIMBL lecture series, Securing Fiori Applications. I'm Jake Eisbart, part of the NIMBL marketing team, and a little bit about us before we start. We are SAP technologists and SAP ecosystem thought leaders. Our consulting business, which is 50% of our work, delivers SAP projects, both technical and functional, while our Denver-based SAP managed services, the other 50%, supports both Fortune 1000 and mid-market 24/7 across 20-plus SAP skill sets. While our projects tend to be technical in nature, HANA, UX, Soulman, we likewise provide deliverable-based SAP functional business processes and PMO services. Here's a list of a couple of the services that we offer, actually all the services that we offer. Obviously, today we will be talking about security and Fiori. And here's a list of some of the customers that we work with. Just a little bit about some housekeeping items. We want to be able to answer as many questions as possible. So if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see the chat box. Feel free to ask any questions, and they will be addressed at the end of the presentation. So let's get into our speakers. Our speakers today are Michael Jolton and Gary Prewett. Michael Jolton is Vice President of Delivery at NIMBL. He spent 25-plus years successfully delivering strategic business transformation projects, both Fortune 500 and small high-growth companies. He's a managed consultant with proven ability to develop and grow businesses by assessing organizational strategies and operational efficiencies. Gary is the security practice lead for NIMBL. He's an active SAP security thought leader with over 12 years of ERP implementation experience and 15 years information security focus. He's worked with clients implementing security strategy essential to operating high-risk environments and has implemented comprehensive information security initiatives. He is also the author of the SAP Press book, co-author actually, of implementing SAP Fiori security. Now, as mentioned, we will be raffling off two e-copies or downloads of the SAP Press book. But if you're interested and don't happen to win, we'll be sending you out the promotional code to get 10% off of the actual book itself too. All right, so let's get to it. Before we start, we would like to start off some poll questions and just kind of get a feel for who's all attending and who's in. So if you'll take a look at the poll question, the first poll question is, have you or do you have plans to release Fiori applications to untrusted devices outside of your corporate network? So feel free to start to fill in those responses. Again, this will just give us a lay of the land. And we're getting a lot of responses, some pretty mixed. Looks pretty even at this point. I'll give people a couple more seconds to fill those in. All right. And the next poll question is going to be, what is your current Fiori deployment schedule? Are we looking at 0 to 6 months, 6 months to a year? We already have Fiori deployed, or we are not considering Fiori at this time. And everybody's starting to fill those in as well. And I'll give people just a couple more seconds to fill that out. All right, looks like we have all the responses in. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to our Vice President of Delivery, Michael Jolton. Michael, go ahead and take it away.
All righty, Jake, thank you very much. Fiori is more than a new SAP user experience, as I'm sure most of you know. It's a revolution in how users interact with SAP to get business done. Listed here in front of you are the Fiori user experience or UX principles. I'm going to focus in on the principles that come into play when discussing Fiori. First is the idea that the interface is responsive. This means that Fiori is something that's meant to be experienced on any device a user chooses, whether it's a desktop, a tablet, or a smartphone. And by allowing your users to access SAP applications outside the corporate network, it becomes imperative that it's being done in a secure manner. The next relevant principle to discuss here is simplicity. with Fiori, you have the opportunity to simplify the user experience to allow pinpoint focus on only what is needed to get the job done. As a result, when creating Fiori applications, you can and will want to remove non-value-adding steps from your business processes. And more than just making it look clean or cool, these simplifications generate real productivity-based return on investment behind your UX initiatives. One security-based example is not requiring a VPN to access SAP applications, or so that handheld SAP applications work like other mobile apps your users have. You could have them securely sign in without the need to remember passwords. This example shows that Fiori can be used to take out a non-productive step, and also that it can provide the simplicity that users have come to expect from today's modern applications. And this brings up the next principle worth discussing here, that Fiori can be delightful. A simple and coherent solution with a good look and feel becomes one that delights users. Imagine that, if you would, happy SAP users. But as we are delighting users by simplifying the security user experience, we cannot sacrifice overall system security, and this is what Gary's going to address in his discussion today. I do want to spend 1 second here on the Fiori Launchpad. With Fiori, the primary access point is now the Fiori Launch Pad, which is accessible via a web browser or a native mobile application. As users have come to experience through other internet solutions, there's going to be additional expectations that this information is accessible from anywhere, not just the office. And while the UX can and will certainly drive productivity improvements on their own, providing mobility can greatly extend those improvements beyond traditional boundaries, truly transforming how business is done. Otherwise, what's the real benefit of our mobile solution, right? So in order to take full advantage of the new Fiori UX, data can and very likely will be exposed in a way it was not previously. So again, ensuring the secure mobile solution becomes a company imperative. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Gary.
Thank you, Michael, and hello to everyone on the call. This is Gary, Security and Compliance Practice Lead here at NIMBL, as Michael mentioned. And one of the reasons I really enjoy working here at NIMBL is I get a chance to work with a lot of customers on a lot of unique challenges in the area of security. Fiori is one of those areas. We got into the UX space even before the Fiori is now free announcement back in 2014, if you guys remember that at Sapphire. Really became an area of emphasis when we started investing in this in 2013. And the SAP Press e-byte implementing SAP Fiori security, it summarizes a lot of the lessons learned and really a lot of the customer education that we've done since. When you have a system that's in an internal network, a lot of your security controls that are get risk down to acceptable levels for an organization. When you expose it to an external system with 4 billion plus internet users, the risk increases by orders of magnitude. So anyway, the book is the kind of the basis for our discussion today. We're going to cover as much as we can in the limited time that we have. That said, we obviously cannot cover everything. We'll cover the areas that we feel, I think, are the highest value for you guys. If you have any questions on any other areas that you think we're glossing over or not highlighting that you're interested in, please let us know. Please drop me a line after the call or ask questions in the chat box there. So today's agenda, we're going to focus on guiding principles for security, make sure we're on the same page there, give you some recommendations, just high-level recommendations. Then we'll kind of deal into the area of system hardening and WebDispatcher. We'll follow that up with a conversation on WebDispatcher. Finally, we'll talk about simplifying authentication. That's an area that a lot of SAP customers are struggling with or want to improve the user experience there. So we'll discuss some options that are available to you guys, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So as MJ mentioned, I'm going to summarize what he said. Fiori is a set of tools and technologies, and really the SAP focus now is it's becoming a design pattern. Eventually, this will be technology agnostic for now. It is a set of mobile optimized applications, but under the covers, it's stuff that we're all familiar with, right? We've got the ABAP front-end server or the gateway server. They've rebranded this fairly recently. That's something we're all familiar with, communicating over RFC connections to ABAP stack systems on the back end, ECC, CRM, possibly OData service calls to HANA. But it's stuff that we all, as security practitioners, have been working to address security in for most of our careers, right? The question that we're going to try to get to here is we have some familiar systems, but we have systems that are exposed to higher risk, and these systems can cross international boundaries if we're dealing with devices and mobile devices that can really be anywhere. How do I secure this type of system? That's the question we're going to try to hopefully get you guys an answer to today. And the biggest area that you can consider when addressing what to secure is the scope of what the problem that you're dealing with. Here we have a framework. This is a PCI-based framework. There's a lot of other great frameworks out there, ISO 27000 series frameworks or COBIT, GASP, that a lot of you guys may be using. PCI is a very pragmatic framework, and that's kind of the basis for today's discussion. So here's sort of the scope of everything you really need to consider when you're talking about securing a solution like Fiori. It's not just roles and authorization, right? The authorization, third box over, authentication beneath that. That's what a lot of customers focus on because, frankly, that's kind of where SOX is. That's what SOX cares about, keeping the accountants honest and giving them only access they need to perform their job. But really, comprehensive security is a lot more than that. It's network architecture. It's secure configuration. Secure software development is a key component to that. So you need to make sure that you're developing apps that don't have software vulnerabilities that attackers can exploit. It's patch and vulnerability management, so on and so forth. So today we're going to highlight a few key areas. We're going to talk about the network architecture in a couple slides here. Secure configuration is what we'll spend a lot of time on today. We'll touch on endpoint security, and then we'll kind of talk about authentication. If you have any questions in any of these areas, again, please feel free to follow up with questions during the webinar or afterwards. Some other sort of guiding principles to keep in mind here. A lot of security practitioners should be familiar with this, but we want to make sure we're all kind of on the same page here. We have a security triad that we're concerned with. Security isn't just confidentiality, it's also availability and integrity. So, a lot of the controls we'll consider, we're talking about maybe reducing the risk of loss of data confidentiality, but at the cost of data availability. And that's sort of the balancing act that we as security practitioners need to do to build a business case around a specific control. We want to make sure that it still enables business functionality. We have the risk equals likelihood times impact equation, which is a great metric for help building those business cases. The likelihood scenario, again, if we talk about, we kind of touched on it in the introduction, we have an internal facing system that's an ECC system that's exposed to 50,000 corporate users on a corporate network, and we're then exposing a system, the front-end server, that gives access to the ECC data on a public network or two public networks with 4 billion plus internet users. That increases the risk by orders of magnitude, 5, 6, 7 orders of magnitude in some cases. We also want to emphasize defense in depth. Most man-made disasters are caused when 2 or more things go wrong. So, for example, pilot error and mechanical malfunction. Getting controls in place that complement each other and allow for that defense in depth means that you can have a firewall administrator make a mistake when they're deploying their rule set and still have adequate security throughout your entire solution. And then finally, the last point is it's the right time to think about security in your Fiori implementation is in your blueprinting phase, and preferably even in your budgeting phase. If you're going to be addressing security issues post-go live, it increases the amount of effort you have to do to make sure you're not impacting the business by orders of magnitude. So it's a lot more expensive to fix post-project. I'm going to pull up a stylized kind of best practice network diagram here. There's a few key areas that we want to emphasize. First of all, the most secure way to deploy Fiori is to not allow access from the public network at all, right? You either force users to VPN in, or you force them to be on networks that are in your corporate network, that are controlled by corporate network policy. That said, there is a lot of additional benefit to be gained by allowing semi-trusted or untrusted devices to access your Fiori web applications. So if you do go that route, a few key things, recommendations that we have here. One is, we'll start from left to right. There's a little orange box here, internal firewall, good to have. A lot of organizations don't have this, but if you look at a lot of the high-risk vulnerabilities that have been published in the past 3 to 4 years, a lot of them are admin service type issues, and a lot of them are things that end users frankly don't have access or don't need access to. It's like connecting directly to HANA, for example. Most users don't need to connect to HANA. They're connecting through the BOP Stack on the front end. Most people don't need access to your SAP Management Console. If you have that internal firewall in place, you're able to enforce policy there and ensure that those connections to administrative service are only coming from trusted devices with the demonstrated need to have. Moving to the right, we have here an area between firewalls called our demilitarized zone. The DMZ is not a SAP principle, but it's something you want to put in place for your Fiori solutions if you're exposing it externally. It basically allows us to limit what an attacker has access to if they are, heaven forbid, able to successfully gain access to and execute commands on the WebDispatcher or the NetWeaver gateway. In this case, rather than being able to access virtually any IP address and service in your internal network, they're restricted to RFC connections back to your trusted SAP systems. Having the DMZ gives you that ability to enforce and monitor those few connections that the NetWeaver gateway and the WebDispatcher have access to very closely. There are a lot of customers that do choose to deploy NetWeaver gateway, and they have good business reasons for doing it. Deploy the NetWeaver gateway in their internal network. And again, if the attacker is able to execute a vulnerable service on your web server, the ICF, or exploit a application vulnerability and execute commands on the NetWeaver gateway, then they have full run of the internal system. So our recommendation is always to put that in the DMZ unless you have a really good business reason not to. And then finally, we're not going to really talk about web application security today. We just don't have the time, but there is a darker orange box there, the web application firewall. This is a great component to have, and a lot of you probably already have web application firewalls today. You just aren't aware of it. It's not relevant to the SAP solutions that you have today. It is definitely relevant in a Fiori context, and it can be used to extend a lot of the controls that you have in place with your secure software development program. You know, the sort of the code reviews that a lot of you do today, the software development best practices, no call systems, make sure we use authority checks in RT code, no call kernel commands, etc. You can augment that with by implementing the web application firewall. So if you do find something post-release, it's relatively easy to identify the issue and mitigate the issue. So that kind of ends the guiding principles section. We're going to launch into system hardening, which is, again, we focus on this because I think it's the area that customers can get the biggest value for. If they spend time hardening their NetWeaver stacks and their Fiori solution, they're going to be a step ahead and have a much more secure solution. Now, the NetWeaver stack is what we're going to focus on, but it's not everything, right? We have a lot of other things that comprise the solution. So your NetWeaver stack is running on a host operating system, Linux or Windows or Unix. It's got a back-end database platform. It's got, you might have the firewall itself might need to be hardened. You might have and you have the mobile devices as well to consider. So If your organization has adopted standards for hardening these platforms, great. You want to probably follow those. It's good to sanity check them every so often against kind of best practice guidelines on hardening systems. And I've got a URL up here, stigviewer.com, great resource for you guys to go out and pull up the latest guidance on hardening, say Linux or iOS for your iPhones or Android. But we're going to focus, unfortunately, there is no standard technical implementation guide or STIG for ABAP. So we're going to kind of take a deep dive into that. Really, the 5 areas that we have recommend customers focus on are these areas. We want to make sure they spend the time hardening the gateway service. We'll talk about why. We want to harden the message server. We want to harden the web server or the Internet Communication Framework, the Internet Transaction Server, either one. We also want to spend the time hardening the BOP Stack. That's kind of a more nebulous, but this general hardening guidelines that don't fall into the first 3 categories. And then we also want to make sure that we have logging so that we can react to issues if they come up. We have the ability to detect and react throughout the life cycle of our solution. So gateway service. The gateway service is typically listens on port 33XX. If your instance is, if you're running your front-end gateway on instance 10, that's going to be port 3310. It's used for RFC communication, CPIC communication. The problem with gateway service, it's a huge hole if you don't do anything about it. It implements the Berkeley remote shell. So RSH. I started my career as a Unix admin, a long time ago, and I remember when this became an issue. It was okay to allow RSH on your servers and use that to centrally manage things. But once you started realizing that attackers were able to use that to get easily jump between systems, about 20 years ago, a lot of Unix admins spent a lot of time throwing out throwing out RSH and implementing SSH. If you are exposing the gateway service, you are exposing RSH to all the people that have access to that, which enables them to basically execute OS commands. So it's a horribly insecure service. We want to restrict that as much as possible. So the first thing to do here is implement firewall policies to ensure that only trusted networks can access the gateway server service port on the front-end server. We don't want anyone in the untrusted networks to be able to access that. We also want to complement that by implementing an access control list, and you can, in RZ10 and your front-end server, you can go in this parameter GWSecInfo, use that to implement an access control list. There's a couple of notes here that I have here, great resources to follow up on if that's something you guys need to do or haven't done yet. And then the third thing that you want to do is we talked about how a lot of the admins, the Unix admins, threw out RSH and implemented SSH. And the reason is SSH sort of implements this concept of server authentication. So it encrypts the communication, but it also sort of forces authentication via a public-private key pair. So a lot like a web server, server's SSL certificate. We use that to authenticate the server, trying to make the SSH connection. So it's an additional level of authentication, and you can implement the very same functionality with these 2 parameters here, SNC enable and SNC permit and secure start. So we've addressed the gateway server. Let's move on to the messenger service. The messenger service is another problem. It's used to load balance and maintain what servers are active in your instance. The problem is that you're making unauthenticated calls to that, and you are able to. There's been a lot of vulnerabilities that allow attackers to escalate privileges there. So we want to not allow that service from untrusted networks. So first thing, we want to implement firewall policies. Don't allow access to the messenger service. We also, since we're taking away the load balancing capability, we want to implement the WebDispatchers. WebDispatchers will take over that load balancing functionality for us. And then we also want to complement that control with by going into RZ10 and implementing this MS-ACL info parameter. And there's the note to the right there for you guys that have not done that yet or want to learn more about it. Great way to restrict that messenger service to only networks and IP addresses with a demonstrated need to have. So moving on to the web server, the Internet Connection Framework. In the SAP Fiori scenario, the front-end server's gateway service, or not gateway, that's a typo, excuse me, the Internet Connection ICF service handles HTTP requests from end users and also handles communication with the SAP NetWeaver application components. Organizations that have other web services on other platforms, think Apache, Tomcat, or IIS, have spent a lot of time developing hardening guidelines around this. You want to make sure you spend the same level of effort to harden your ICF. The first thing to do, and probably the most important thing, is don't enable insecure services. So there's a lot of services that are delivered as part of when you install the front-end server, the BOP Stack. You get a lot of additional goodies in there. Some horribly insecure services out there, things like, that allow you to make RFC over HTTP calls, or that give you the ability to emulate the SAP GUI. We don't want to allow attackers to have access to that. So most of the SAP Fiori implementation guides I've seen are pretty good about this. They restrict, they tell you the specific nodes in the ICF that you need to activate. Some I have run into guides most recently, not in Fiori, but in GRC context. There's the GRC implementation guide tells you to go into activate everything under, I think it's BC SAP, the SAP node, and that's just a horribly bad idea. You want to only activate those services on a demonstrated need-to-have basis. If you come across a guide that tells you to do that, don't do it. Second, we want to restrict access from the WebDispatcher. So we have WebDispatchers in place now. Talk about this more in the next session as well. We want to implement that access so that only devices on the untrusted networks, or the devices on untrusted networks, only can access services that they need to have. And sometimes there's a business requirement to have additional services available to internal devices as opposed to external devices. And a great example of this is Portal. If you're enabling Portal access to your front-end server, you're going to need to enable some relatively insecure services. We can do that and still mitigate the risk from untrusted devices by implementing web filtering in your web dispatchers. We also want to disable unencrypted traffic to your ICF server. We don't want to allow any HTTP. And the primary reason we want to do this is to limit the risk of a man-in-the-middle attack. The guy in the coffee shop hosting the fake Wi-Fi, they can forge, redirects to the unencrypted channel that clients may not catch, and in some cases are relatively seamless. The client won't even notice it. Your users won't notice it. If you disable that unencrypted port, port 80 on your ICF, you won't have to worry about an attacker trying to force them over the unencrypted channel. Again, if they're in the unencrypted channel, then the attacker can inspect and inject at their leisure. We don't want that. That's definitely a detriment to security. The last thing here on this page I want to do is disable multiple logins in the ICF. You have to do this at the service level. So for each service, you have to disable multiple logons. There's another RZ10 parameter that controls the number of if you do or don't allow multiple GUI logons. That has no impact on the ICF. So in the next slide here, we've got a screen grab of you go into the service node, you go to your advanced properties. Here you can select check for multiple users, and then it's a system-wide check. So if you have multiple nodes in your instance, then you can detect that across all the nodes. So great check to have. Also, you want to implement, you want to activate HTTP session security management. So I've got kind of a long, lengthy URL to the help, the SAP help here. It gives you a lot of information about this. You have a few parameters that control this. One of them you may opt to not implement or not go with the SAP guidelines. the security session timeout. From a usability perspective, I mean, the most secure way to do this is to implement that for 5 minutes. We have a security session timeout of 5 minutes. Users are forced to re-authenticate after that. That is going to have a huge impact to the usability of your application, right? So I believe the SAP recommendation here is 1,800 seconds. A lot of our customers set this to 3,600 or higher. We don't want to force re-authentication to Fiori. We only want to enforce it if it's been idle for more than an hour. So that's one key area that the customers do differentiate from, but you want to balance the availability of the application with the security of the application. Moving on, next section is BOP Stack Hardening, some recommendations here. A lot of these are in the early watch reports, so I will gloss over them. We all know to lock down SAP Star known accounts. We also want to make sure we don't allow attackers to disable authority checks. So there's the object disabling active parameter that we can use to control that. We also want to restrict the SAP Management Console to only users with a demonstrated need to have basis, or networks and IP addresses with a demonstrated need to have. So we definitely don't want this from untrusted networks. We also want to make sure that if we have that internal firewall, that we're only allowing networks and devices with a demonstrated need to have access to the SAP Management Console. Password complexity requirements. A lot of you guys have this in place today. This is your, minimum password length. How long the password lasts, when does it expire, etc. We want to disable the command field and debugger. We want to disable call system via this parameter rdisp call system. This one is it can help augment sloppy programming. So if we do have a programmer that is using call system in their ABAP code, we can disable it here. There's another bullet point missing here. We want to confirm that anonymous RFC calls are disabled. This is a standard setting now for newer ABAPs. NetWeaver ABAP systems. Some of the older ones do allow you to set this, so it's worth checking to make sure that this is set correctly. You also want to ensure that they're configured not to use expired passwords. Most of your RFC connections will use hard-coded credentials that are service users or system users that don't have password expiration. But if we are using Dialog, we want to make sure that we don't allow them to use expired passwords. We also want to ensure that our SSO tickets are encrypted to prevent replay attacks. So attacker can spoof, can grab this ticket and then assert that they are the person that originally authenticated. So if we force this over an encrypted communication channel, then that chance of a replay attack goes down to virtually zero. Disabling debugging ABAP over HTTP, it's another key one for Fiori scenarios. We also want to make sure, this is pretty standard, that we don't allow users to skip the first screen. And then finally, we want to disable multiple logons. Again, the ICF setting to prevent multiple logons doesn't impact the GUI and vice versa, so we want to make sure we set it in both places. Moving on, the last section here is logging. It's a little bit like insurance. You don't need it until you need it. And the reason most customers don't log is because they're concerned about data availability, right? If our logs are filling up the disks, taking system down or stopping logging behind the scenes, they don't want to deal with that. With a little capacity planning, though, you can buy the disk. Disk is relatively cheap these days to make sure that you're logging everything. And again, the key benefit here is you have the opportunity to detect an attack as it's underway before too much damage happens. And again, this is something that you might use in concert with something like SAP Enterprise Threat Detection, something that would detect anomalous behavior and alert you to it. And then it also gives you the ability to put mitigating controls on things if you do find something in the future, heaven forbid. So again, we want to log 5 different areas here. We want to log the gateway traffic. There's the note there to the right to get you more information on that. We want to log the message server traffic. We also want to log our web traffic. There's a rather lengthy URL there that I've included to help you log the ICF traffic, basically. We want to make sure we activate table logging. And there's the note there to help you do that if you haven't done that already. A lot of customers do this today, which is great. And then we also want to activate an SM20 logging. And most customers have this in place today, but they're probably logging a limited set of events or users, like things like firefighter IDs. Recommendation is to log as much as you can. So why not log transaction starts and report starts for all of your users? Logins and log-offs, everything. I mean, all that stuff is information that you can use later down the road to alert you to the fact that something funny is going on. So we talked about WebDispatcher earlier, and this is really a continuation of the system hardening session, but WebDispatcher is worth its own section here. So again, the key benefit is it takes away the risk of an attacker using your messenger service to execute an attack. So first of all, WebDispatcher, what it is a reverse proxy with an implementation of mod rewrite. It gives you 4 key benefits. You load balance, so you don't have to have the messenger server load balance for you. You can implement web filtering, so restrict ICF services from your untrusted devices out there on the internet to only the URIs or the URLs that they have a demonstrated need to have. They can prevent directory transversal attacks, and they can also offer more centralized logging. So if I have 2, 3, 4 systems in my front-end server instance, troubleshooting can be kind of a pain if you're trying to collect fault logs from 4 different servers. But if you have one WebDispatcher server that's logging all that, it's one place to go to look at what's going on. What it is not, and this is kind of the key thing that we have to educate our customers on, it's not magic. It doesn't do much more than what we said in the slide previously. It doesn't fix all of your security problems, and it can't solve application security vulnerabilities. So if there's an application attack that attackers using to escalate access in your Fiori solution, a WebDispatcher will remain blissfully ignorant of that and will not prevent it. Poorly misconfigured servers. So if I do have extra ICF servers and I don't implement web filtering in my WebDispatcher, the WebDispatcher will do nothing to prevent a user from using that poorly misconfigured service or vulnerable service. And then it won't prevent you from patches. If you don't patch your systems, an attacker can use those new vulnerabilities to potentially attack and gain additional access in your system. So WebDispatcher will not help you with your patch management. But that said, it's still an extremely important key component to your Fiori solution if you're deploying it externally and really even internally. And again, this is the front-end system that should be terminating all of the connections from your untrusted mobile devices out there on the public internet. You don't want any of those connections going straight to your NetWeaver gateway. Now, you can implement WebDispatcher insecurely as well. So I want to spend some time with some recommendations on hardening your WebDispatcher systems. There's an SAP note here at 870127 that you can use, and SAP keeps current. So this will probably change over time. Encourage you to go out there and look at the current guidelines on what they're recommending that you use to harden your WebDispatcher. The first thing you want to do is disable your error logging. There's a parameter here, ISHTTP show detailed errors. We should not permit that except if only those limited times that it's needed to troubleshoot a production issue. Then it should be turned back off. Again, this gives your attacker additional access about your internal or information about your internal network that they don't really need, things like internal IP addresses. They don't need to know that. We want to make sure we implement web filtering. Again, we want to only enable the services on the ICF that we need, and then we only want to allow access from the WebDispatcher to only the services that the untrusted devices need. And you do that via this parameter WDisp permission table. We want to make sure that the WebDispatchers only allow HTTPS for the same reason we mentioned that the ICF should only allow HTTPS. And here's the parameters that control that. There's also admin access that you can get. You should bind that to its own separate IP and disallow access from the the untrusted public internet. And that's controlled via the parameter ICM, HTTP, admin, and then the port. And then finally, you should encrypt that access as well. So now this is a duplicate of the top, but you should also make sure that all access to your admin server is encrypted. So that said, we spent a lot of time in the webinar today talking about hardening and WebDispatcher. Again, that's a really key control, the system secure configuration control that a lot of customers can take and implement and really gain a lot of benefit from right out of the chute, so to speak. The other area that we wanted to talk about today was simplifying authentication. This is an area of pain for a lot of Fiori customers out there. So first of all, there's a few sort of solutions that typically involve an additional license that can help simplify this experience for your mobile users. So I want to mention a few of those. SAP Mobile Secure. SAP Mobile Secure is a cloud-based offering that gives you Afaria capabilities or mobile device management capabilities, so you can actually harden your devices. It gives you a current Fiori client build, so if you want to wrap that with Makana, you can get that with SAP Mobile Secure. And it also gives you the ability to deploy that client with a customized icon. So some clients feel that's a great value add. Afaria, part of Mobile Secure, that's an on-premise offering. You can do that as a cloud-based service as well. It's a mobile device solution. It's very similar to if you have Ironport or Good Technologies. Other MDMs are out there on the market, and if you have an investment in one of those already, you can definitely use those to enforce things like making sure that any device that's attaching to Fiori is at least has a PIN, and the PIN, the device locks every 5 minutes or after 5 minutes of not being used. So great way to help ensure that a lot of your endpoints are secured, the endpoints that are connecting to your Fiori solution are secured. SAP App Protection by Makana, we talked about this. We've touched on this briefly in today's webinar, but basically it's a great solution out there. Allows you to assume that your device is basically untrusted. So the Makana comes in and says, hey, we're going to assume that this device already has malware on it. We still want to allow them to interact successfully, securely with Fiori. How do we do that? So it handles this by encrypting the app, the Fiori client in this case, and running it in an encrypted sandbox. It's a great solution that's also available. Also helps you simplify access to your backend applications in conjunction with the next bullet point here, which is Makana Atlas. I said Makana to kind of illustrate that there's a clear connection between SAP App Protection by Makana and the Makana Atlas appliance. This is not an SAP product, and it's actually not even a Makana product anymore because they spun this off into Blue Cedar Networks. So it's technically Blue Cedar Atlas, but it's still a great solution to simplify access to your Fiori solution. We'll touch on why that is here in the next slide. And then you have SAP NetWeaver Single Sign-On. That's got some components that you can use to simplify access. And if you already have this today, you can leverage that. And then finally, the SAP mobile platform still allows you to extend your Fiori client functionality so you can make it do anything. You can make it tap dance, do whatever. This next slide is a matrix of sort of all the capabilities that you get with the various solutions that I mentioned in the previous slide. So the first line there, Fiori browser access, that's just sort of what you get out of the box. If you're an SAP customer, you can fire up your on your iPhone Safari browser, and then on your front-end server, you can configure the basic username and password authentication. So you force them to log in with their user master details that are local to your front-end server. If you don't want them to have to remember that their front-end server password is X and their ECC password is Y and their CRM password is Z, you can implement SAML 2.0. Some people do call this single sign-on. It's not technically single sign-on, but it is one username and password that a user has to remember to authenticate to their Fiori Launch Pad. You can also implement certificate-based authentication, and we'll talk about what that looks like in the next slide. Set of slides. The biggest problem with certificate-based authentication is it's great. It really makes it easy for users to access your Fiori applications, but the certificate management can become a hassle for a lot of users out there. PIN entry is just another, hey, we want to allow our users to access via like a 4-digit PIN. There are a couple of solutions available for you guys to use that. The SAP NetWeaver SSO. If you were running 2.0 Support Pack 4 and above, you get the SAP Mobile Authenticator client, which you can use to enable PIN entry to your Fiori Launchpad. And then last but not least, stored credentials. You can accomplish this with SMP. Again, you can do almost anything with SMP. And then the Mocana Atlas or Blue Cedar Atlas with the SAP App Protection by Mocana will allow you to do all of these, and it also simplifies your certificate management. We'll talk about that again shortly. The other features to the right there, I just have them up there for reference. They can be used to help build a business case for these solutions if that's something that you guys are interested in doing. So again, just kind of showing everyone what the experience looks like with just kind of the base username and password access. Users going to come into their access the web application. They're going to be presented a username and password form to use to verify their identity. Once they've successfully authenticated, they get taken back to the Launchpad, and then they get taken back. From there, they can navigate into their individual Fiori tiles or apps. With the X509 certificate authentication and the Mocana Tap and Go solution, you basically are taken straight to the Launchpad, and you're forced to present a certificate, which usually your device has just the one certificate. You tap on it, you're taken straight to the Launchpad, and then from there you can navigate back into your backend applications. The key difference again is again the certificate management in the free version is the biggest hassle for most customers. You got to register your certificates with Certificate Authority, which most customers are using something like Active Directory Certificate Server. They're then having to somehow securely get that to the device itself. So they're having to manually deploy it to 500, 1,500, 5,000 devices, and they have to do that on an annual basis. So that's where the Mocana, the SP App Protection by Mocana really differentiates itself. It makes that whole registration process pretty seamless. The user authenticates, and then Mocana handles the registration of the certificate on the device. And that pretty much summarizes our user authentication section. Before I go on, I'm going to turn it over to Jake for a couple of poll questions.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, so we talked about security. We've touched on Fiori as well. The poll questions are already going out. People are already answering. We are getting a lot of responses on additional information on SAP Fiori and UX as well, too, that build or personas. If you like any additional information on that, you can let us know. And we're also going to briefly go over just some of the security services that we offer. Gary can take this.
All right. So, again, the focus of today's webinar, we want to give you as much good information as possible, actual information that you can take and use as you're assessing your security posture on your Fiori solution, or discussing how you're going to implement security in your Fiori solution. I would be remiss if I didn't say, at least let you guys know that we would love to help here. We got some great kind of high-value, quick-hit offerings that you guys can take advantage of. Security strategy roadmap, just kind of help you guys understand the specific controls that you guys need to consider. It's a 3-day session typically. We have more in-depth security assessment that we can use to help address existing risk that you may not be aware of. We have a compliance assessment, and then of course we have mobile security strategy, more focused on how can we simplify authentication to the Fiori, your Fiori solution. So Over to you, Jake.
And based on what Gary just mentioned, any additional information we can send you on the security strategy roadmap, the assessment, the compliance assessment, or the mobile security strategy, you can just let us know. And then obviously if you want, a lot of people are just typing all of the above, which is good. We'll give a couple people some a little bit of time to continue to fill that out. We have a lot of people filling that in. Just give us a couple more seconds before we just talk about upcoming events, and then we will get to the Q&A. We have a lot of questions to answer, so we want to make sure that we are able to answer as many questions as possible. So a couple more seconds on the poll questions. And great. All right, so before we go to the Q&A, I'm going to talk about our upcoming webinar. A lot of people are talking about and excited about Soulman 7.2. That will be our next webinar led by our Soulman lead and our technical monitoring lead. So if you'd like information or for us to send you information, on that, just type Soulman into the chat box, and we will send you out a link to the registration if that is what you are currently interested in. As it says, it's going to be September 1st at 11 a.m., our next. All right, let a couple people fill that out. Another thing I want to mention, so you can continue to fill out Soulman in the chat box. Another thing that we're excited about is ASAG University. If you haven't heard about it already, it is essentially a traveling SAP campus coming to different towns. It's a 1 to 3 day intensive seminar, hands-on labs taught by experts. You'll see that led by NIMBL and some of the partners. We're going to be in Toronto in about a month, a little bit less than a month. If you'd like any more information on ASAG University, just type ASAG into the box, and then we'll send you the direct link to that. We cover HANA, we cover UX. We're going to be in Chicago doing Soulman, SAP ERP 101. That's going to be in Minneapolis and Raleigh, and then we're going to be doing practical analytics for business users. So you'll be able to check that out. We'll send everybody a lot of information as well. And if you didn't see in the chat box, everybody will be receiving a full edited presentation of today's webinar. So you needn't worry if you kind of skipped out or just didn't catch every single slide. You'll be getting all this information. And as far as our raffle goes for Gary and Michael Pytel's book, our winners are BJ Nepal and Prince Varghese. So you will be receiving a free download of that. And I will also be letting everybody know in the chat box the 10% code and the link to the SAP Press for that as well. And before I turn it over to Gary for questions, as you are logging out, please feel free to fill out the comments because we love to hear what you thought of the presentation, what we may have missed, and what subjects you would like us to cover afterwards. So at this point,